Hi Weatherby students. Okay, we're now going to be looking at a very different poem in the anthology. It's a modern poem written by a Ghanaian poet, Kofi Awuna, and whilst being very personal and referring to sort of characters' experiences, this poem also, in many respects, seems to be talking about the history of the sea and its sort of timeless power. And for me, the final message of the poem is the way in which nature will always overcome humanity. And I suppose really the power of Mother Nature. And it seems both in fear of that strength, but also sort of in awe of it and impressed by it. But there's clearly a critique going on here as well, as human lives are so significantly affected by the power of Mother Nature. So let's get cracking. Now, unfortunately, I'm so sorry, the format of this poem hasn't put it into stanzas. But just so you're aware, we have 4 irregular stanzas. Now, there's no rhyme in this poem, but there's a lot of repetition. And you can't see the whole poem here, but when I move my camera phone, you'll be able to see it all. But you'll notice that you can actually see a sort of visual image of perhaps a tide coming in and out to represent the theme of the poem. So let's begin. The sea eats the land at home. Now that's a very important title because it's actually a refrain throughout the poem. And immediately you would have picked up on that sort of very strong use of personification, that the sea is eating the land. Now obviously sea and land are in contrast to one another. And we have this idea that the sea is superior to the land. I always think at home is a very interesting addition to the title, that the sea, because it could easily have been, the sea eats the land. The sea is destroying the landscape. But the fact that it's at home immediately seems to bring the poet speaker in and makes this a very personal experience. Home obviously connotes something that should be secure, comforting. And obviously the fact that the land has been eaten, metaphorically, by the sea, sort of referring to its destruction, would obviously affect somebody who would refer to the land as their home. At home, again, a repetition reiterating that idea, the sea is in the town. Now, obviously, that's a very powerful image because that's where the sea does not belong. It's running in and out, again, very much personifying the sea. Running in and out of the cooking places, collecting. Again, for me, that gives it a really sort of furtive, meaning like secretive, stealth-like quality. Collecting the firewood from the hearths and sending it back at night. We have a sort of, for me, this is a very personal response, but a very eerie, ominous character here, running in, stealing the firewood, something that is so vital to livelihood. Again, the reference to cooking places and firewood and the hearth, really the heart of a house, all for me links back to this image of a home, somewhere where people live, something that should be sort of a very safe and warm, comforting place. And it sends it back at night. And then we have this refrain, the sea eats the land at home. It's almost a bit like an incantation. This very powerful, especially as it's repeated, this powerful line reminding us of the strength of the sea. I think the repetition actually shows the ongoing nature of the sea, the fact that it is relentless, the fact that it will keep on destroying and that it has existed since time began. It came one day at the dead of night. Obviously meaning that, this is a phrase that we use, meaning that it was sort of very late at night, but dead, I think, has very interesting, I think the use of it is interesting, because obviously the sea would have brought about death. Destroying the cement walls. Now, cement is extremely strong material, showing again just how strong the sea is. Carried away, falls, the cooking pots and the ladles. Now, this is an asyndetic list when we have the use of and rather than no conjunction. It is asyndetic rather than syndetic. for me, the effect here it's just giving a sense of quantity of all the things that it has destroyed, and we're referring back to really the livelihood of the people who live in this village. The fact that their cooking pot and ladles and that's a type of bird are taken away, things that they have to survive using. The sea is the land at home. Again, it's the idea that just like the poem, it goes in, it goes out, it goes in, it goes out. This deadly, relentless force. It is a sad thing to hear the wails and the mourning shouts of the women, calling on all the gods they worship to protect them from the angry sea. Again, we have personification. It's almost this kind of biblical image of a sort of Jehovah-like God sending a sea, wanting mankind to be punished. It makes me think of the Old Testament and how God was represented as very punitive. It's quite a powerful image of nature punishing man. Again, for me, this is a huge understatement. When that happens in literature, it's called litotes. It's a sad thing. I mean, what an understatement. This village has been destroyed, and it's just a bit of a sad thing. But again, it really allows us to hear that spoken voice. This is a very conversational poem in many respects, but also in many respects it isn't, because it's a bit like an incantation. It is a sad thing to hear the wails and the mourning shouts. Now, we have a bit of play on words there, because they're mourning because of the loss of the village, of people who have died, of the animals, of the land. But also, it is the morning, it's the night after this destruction has taken place. And they are calling on all the gods, just all the idea that they're so desperate that they are asking everybody for help adds to the travesty and the sense of tragedy that's occurring here, to protect them from the angry sea. And then we have a character here. Now, that immediately makes this very real. The idea that real people with names are affected, rather than just destroying. It's not just women anymore, this plural. It's a single person, single female. Aku stood outside where her cooking pot stood. I love the repetition of stood, because it's the idea that the cooking pot is displaced with her, and the cooking pot should still be where it was. It's the heart of the house, and now there is no cooking pot. There's no livelihood left. There's no nourishment. It creates a real image of something being disturbed and displaced and ruined. She's with her 2 children. Again, whenever children and women tend to be referred to in literature, we see quite a vulnerable image. Sort of historically, the idea that these people are suffering, it makes the reader very sympathetic. 2 children shivering from the cold. They have nowhere else to go. Their house is destroyed. Now this image for me is really moving. Her hands on her breasts, weeping mournfully. It makes her a very childlike image. That really disturbed me when I first read it, because if you actually imagine her body language, sort of holding her chest, rather than her 2 children, it creates an idea of desperation and absolute despair. And weeping, again, it isn't screaming, isn't crying. It's this sort of quiet, consistent tone, the idea of it being ongoing, but not screaming, not shouting, just a slow realization of the impact of the sea. Her ancestors have neglected her. Her gods have neglected her. We have a very small example of anaphora, this repetition of this phrase. It was a cold Sunday morning. So again, we've got pathetic fallacy, this idea of something, there's a sense of foreboding, something bad is going to happen. And then it obviously does. Sunday should be a day sort of off in most cultures. It's the Sabbath. It's a day of rest. It's a day to worship your God. And here there is just destruction. It's a cold Sunday morning. The storm was raging. Goats and fowls were struggling in the water. The angry sea of the cruel sea. By the way, this is all our 4th and final stanza. It's a lot longer than the other. So the human impact is being seen as far more important. Let's check, you can still see that, yes. It was a cold Sunday morning, the storm was raging. Goats and foals were struggling in the water, the angry water of the cruel sea. the lap-lapping of the bark, water at the shore. Lap-lapping is really making this very sensory poem that we're transported there and we can hear it. And above the sobs and the deep and low moans. I'll just move that so you can, sorry, it's very makeshift. I will learn how to do a sophisticated video, I promise, at some point for these poetry videos, but for now this will do. So, the lap-lapping of the bark water at the shore and above the sobs and the deep and low moans. Now we have a lot of assonance there to really make us hear those cries. It's a very assonant line. Lots of vowel sounds is what assonance means. Was the eternal hum. Now, it's never going to die. That sea is indestructible, eternal. It will go on forever. And hum, for me, is incredibly ominous. This idea of hum is often in the background. It's always there. And with amongst all this death, you have the living sea. It has taken away their belongings. Edina, we have another character, again making this very human. This isn't just about loss of the physical land. This is about loss of people's lives. Edina has lost her trinkets, which were her dowry, so something very necessary. In order to get married, a dowry is what would be paid in order for a woman in some cultures to be able to be accepted by their husband's family, their future husband's family. So without a dowry, which would be a sum of money, Edina won't be able to marry, which really limits her prospects in this culture. Edina has lost the trinkets, which were her dowry and her joy. So it's the idea they're not just necessary, they also bring about a happiness that cannot be replaced by anything material. In the sea that eats the land at home, we've got that really powerful refrain, but also we then repeat it, but again with more gravitas. In the sea that eats the land at home, eats the whole land at home. Now, when you have a refrain that is repeated so frequently within a poem, when you adapt it slightly, it becomes very profound, very noticeable. And here we have the addition of the word whole. It's the idea that everything is destroyed because this is a merciless, cruel, and essentially sort of all-powerful sea. Now, for me, this poem is, as I said at the beginning, it's sort of, I suppose it's incriminating the sea and the destruction it's able to cause. And the human impact is so negative that cannot be mistaken. But I cannot pick up on almost an awe, which has aspects of, I suppose, amazement and I want to use the word respect, but that's the wrong word. It's more a sense of being so sort of realizing one's inferiority to something so powerful. And this isn't a celebration of the sea, but it's certainly acknowledgement of its strength, which in a form is a celebration. So the kind of questions you might get would be, how does Awuno convey the power of the sea, vividly convey, because this is a very vivid poem. Or you might expect something along the lines of, how does Awuno movingly present the destruction that nature can cause? Something along those lines. It's going to be about nature, it could be about humanity, or it could just be something as simple as, how does Awuno vividly convey thoughts and feelings about the sea? So, do not forget to comment on the structure. As you can see, I've got this interesting shape, which becomes all the more aggressive at the end. The lines, so the line lengths become, I think, harsher. Again, perhaps showing just how powerful the sea is. Do not forget to comment on the lack of rhyme, the use of repetition, especially that refrain, the sea eats the land at home. And you have some very interesting word choices and again, images. And you know how much CIE loves imagery. So prioritize, talking about, for instance, the personification of the sea, the fact that it can destroy even a cement wall, which is obviously not accidental, that cement is normally associated with being, indestructible. talk about the human tone. This sort of, it's both very reflective but also very angry, and the speaker's voice really does come through. Talk about the description of the characters here and how that would make a reader feel. The reference to gods as well, but also the idea of being quite helpless, neglected by something that you would normally believe in so strongly. Okay, and again, if you have any questions about this poem in the lead up to your exams, just come and see me. All right, bye.